This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. So you'll see that there's a QR code on the screen at the moment. We're going to stop that share in just a moment. We'll share that again at the end of our session. But you'll see if you want to scan that code or copy that little URL there into your own web address bar in your search engine of choice, you'll be able to head over to our webpage and you'll be more than welcome to upload a copy of your constitution if you would like us to take a look at it. We'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the session. For now, however, I'm going to stop this share so that you can see us a little bigger and we're going to get into it. Over to you, Matt.
Before I do, bananas, Kiwana Bananas, that's not their actual logo, or it is?
No, that's right. Yeah, it's the Banana Army. So come finals time, everyone's dressed in yellow t-shirts and the club coordinates. Excellent. It's brilliant. Yep.
Okay, so yes, thanks everybody for joining. So today's topic is Constitution Confessions. What we're not going to do is play good cop, bad cop and lock you in a room with a bright light and make you confess around bad constitutions or anything that's gone wrong. But what we're going to do today is share with you some of the examples that we've come across at CPRG, both Steve and I. Steve for a lot longer than I am. That's not a dig at his age. It's just that he's been with this organisation for a lot longer than I have. But hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clubs and associations and organisations have come to us for help for constitutions. So we've seen a lot of examples of how a constitution can expose an organisation. But a good constitution can equally protect you and your members, and if you're on the management committee or the board, people in those positions as well. So really quickly, just in case people are unfamiliar with the term constitution, the constitution in a very general sense is the rules of your organisation, not to be confused with the rules of a sport. So if you are a local soccer club, there will be the rules of soccer, football, that the juniors and seniors need to adhere to in regard to how they play the game. It's not those types of rules. It's the rules in terms of how your organisation needs to function. So pretty much every constitution will have things like the board structure or the management committee structure, who your members are, not literally a list of your members, but the types of memberships that you offer, meeting provisions, so how are you supposed to run your general meetings or your board and management committee meetings, things like who is eligible to vote, discipline, appeal rights, the way that the finances need to be managed. All of those will sit in your constitution. Depending on what type of organisation you are, so whether you're a sporting club, a not-for-profit, a community organisation, whether you're in Queensland, New South Wales, across the ditch, you might be a company limited by guarantee, which is a national registration with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC. Regardless of where you're located and what type of organisation you are, you will be required to have your constitution registered with your regulatory body. And most of the time before that happens, your members need to approve or adopt that constitution before those changes are made, and then before you lodge it with that regulatory body. So depending on where you are around the world and what type of organisation you are, if you're an incorporated not-for-profit, which we would guess that most of the people joining here are, that would be the process. Anything to add on that, Steve?
Yeah, I'm interested to know when those online last updated their constitution. So I know that we've got some people joining from councils, for instance, and you're here, to learn a little more about constitutions to support those that exist in the way of not-for-profits in your local government area. But for those who are joining from an organisation, and even those people in councils are often involved in organisations themselves, I want you all to just pop a quick response to that question, please. So when was your constitution last updated? The options are no idea, 10 plus years ago, between 5 and 9 years ago, since 2020, or for those of you who are definitely in the right place to learn about constitutions today, what is a constitution? So we'll just give you a moment to answer that question. And this leads into some of the discussion that we're going to be having today in terms of being very familiar with your governing document and knowing exactly when it was last updated. So we'll give you another few moments there. Looks like we've got responses.
Can everyone see the results?
Yeah, we'll share them with everybody. Yep. So once I end that poll, looks like we're slowing down a little bit. I'm going to end that. Now we haven't got everyone responded, but that's okay. and I'm going to show those results now so you can all see it. So a bit of a spread there, probably a good thing. We've got no one who has said no idea, and no one who's asked what a constitution is. So we've got a good foundation level of understanding, and then a really good, pretty even spread across the other three there, Macca.
And looking at that spread there that Steve's talking about, my quick math says 63% is going to be 5 years or longer. So about 20 or 26% 10 years ago, and then the other 37% 5 to 9 years ago. We recommend reviewing your constitution at least every 3 to 5 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that that review leads to changes. So it could be that you've reviewed your constitution 3 years ago, so it's time to have a look at it again. Or I should say you've updated your constitution 3 years ago. You review it and you read through it, and it's still great. It still applies to the way that your organisation operates, so there's no need for a change. But still reviewing it is really important, because there'll be two things that'll happen. There'll be something that has happened since you last changed the constitution that you've picked up on, or there's an error there or an inconsistency or something that we need to change because that caused us some grief. And I've forgotten my train of thought. The first one was what would happen, and the second one I can't actually remember, but I'm sure it was really good.
It'll come back to you when you're not
come back to me.
When you're not trying.
I wish I could think of it. So yeah, really interesting. And the question that we ask is, when was your constitution last updated? And as I said before, there's two stages: updated and then lodged. I'm going to talk about the first confession that I'm going to talk about actually deals with that, the difference between a constitution that has been maybe reviewed, updated, and then adopted at a meeting, or maybe it hasn't even got to that stage, but it was never actually registered with the regulatory body. So it's as if that never happened. So you need to revert back to the old constitution.
I'm just going to quickly jump in there. We've got a couple of attendees, one who asked if they were able to see anything. Just for clarity, we're not currently sharing a screen, so all that you should be able to see is Matt and I sitting in our little studio here. Jeff has let us know that he's got no sound, so he's not going to be able to hear me saying this, ironically. So I'll type a quick message to Jeff while you carry on. But just to let everybody know that the session is being recorded, and you'll be shared a copy of the recording, so you'll be able to see and hear using that medium. So I'll let you carry on, Matt, and I'll reply to Jeff here.
And I thought of the second thing. So the first thing is that it comes up during the time between your last review. The second thing that happen is that when you're reviewing it, you'll pick up some things that might not have caused you issues yet, but during the review you pick up and think, oh, actually that would cause us issues if we hadn't changed it. So it's a good reason to review it. So my confession number one. So this was an organisation that we worked with, and it was a national, so it was a company limited by guarantee, which was lodged with ASIC, as I said before. But it was also a charity, so they also report to the Australian Charities and Non-for-Profit Commission. So two different regulatory bodies for those types of organisations. So it was a company limited by guarantee and a charity. They engaged us to help with their annual general meeting, so the facilitation of that meeting. Everything was scheduled, everything was going really well. We had it all ready to go at, I think it was 1 o'clock on a Saturday, so 1 p.m. And about 10 a.m. that morning, of the day of the AGM, the board received an email from a member saying that I am questioning the validity of the constitution that you have called this AGM under, and therefore the elections and the board positions and everything that goes with it. I believe that the constitution that you say is ours, the 2022 version, is not actually valid, and it was never validly adopted and it was never validly registered. So 3 hours from receiving that email to having that AGM. What the board needed to do then is to make a decision as to A, can we actually prove that that constitution was registered with the appropriate bodies? They couldn't, so there was no evidence to show that that was ever done. And B, they couldn't even really find any information around the general meeting that was supposed to have taken place in 2022 to adopt that constitution. So they were between a rock and a hard place there, because although they felt quite confident that it was the right one, it was a bit risky to go ahead with that constitution for the AGM, given that the 2016 and 2022 versions were very different. So given the time and given the 3 hours between that email and the AGM, they decided to reschedule it because they didn't want to run the risk of having that AGM and electing board members and going through that process under the wrong constitution, which would potentially, not necessarily definitely, but potentially invalidate the election and the AGM itself. So the lesson there is to make sure as an organisation that if you do review a constitution and then make changes and present that to your members at a general meeting to be adopted, you absolutely must make sure that that constitution is then registered with the appropriate regulatory body. So that could be someone like ASIC, it could be a version of Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs. But you need to make sure you go through that process, because in most instances, until that regulatory body registers your constitution, so that will be an official email or letter to say your constitution has been registered as of this date, it doesn't count. So you might have gone through the meeting, you might have had the general meeting, you might have done all the adoption and you did the notice period and everyone put their hand up, it was 100% success rate. Great, we've got a new constitution, 2026, we're good to go. But until you submit it to the regulatory body, it doesn't actually take effect. So it's really important to know that. The second part of that cautionary tale is that if you do get the registration from the regulatory body, make sure that that information is easy to find both for your current board and committee and future boards and committees. Because it might be that Steve Connelly was the secretary at the time and the email from the regulatory body went to his email address, steve@koanabananas.com. And then when Steve leaves and he's no longer the secretary, we don't know, we have no proof, we have no evidence as to whether that constitution actually was registered. And I say that because it happens much more than 50%, probably I'm thinking 80 to 90% of our clubs that we work with, clubs and associations, they don't actually have evidence of when that constitution was registered. So when CPRG, when we do constitution reviews, we actually ask our clients to provide that information to us when the regulatory body provides it, so we can save it on our file and we've got it. So then if a future management committee or board gets in touch with us and says, oh, we've got your logo here on our constitution, but we're just wondering whether that was ever actually registered, we can show them. You can't rely on us, so we still really strongly advocate for having that information readily available. And then the last thing around that constitution being registered and formally ready to go is ensuring that that information is made available to your members as well. So if you've got a new constitution and it's been registered, put that registered constitution on your website or your member portal, so all of your members can go on there. And if it used to be the 2016 version, but it's now the 2026 version, but the 2016 one's still on the website, it can be confusing for your members. So part of that process is making sure that that constitution goes up.
And that point's really important, Matt, because the constitution of your club, association, or other not-for-profit is actually a contract between your members and the organisation itself. So it's critical that members have got ready access to that document, and it's critical that they at least have the opportunity to familiarise themselves with it, even if they may not take that opportunity in every case, because they are bound by becoming a member of your organisation. They are bound by that constitution, and it's really important that they are able to become familiar with those rights and privileges that are afforded to them by virtue of their membership of your organisation. And that's probably a bit of an oversight as well, in that many organisations with which we work do not make their constitution publicly accessible or available for their members. It is a public document. You can request a copy from a regulatory authority. If you're online today and you're a charity, your constitution is listed on the ACNC portal, and I can, as anyone can, with access to the internet, go and download a copy of that governing document. So it is public information, and there's no reason to be keeping a tight lid on that document. And just one other thing that I wanted to touch on. So Matt identified that email came in before that AGM, and therefore the handbrake was able to be pulled on and the AGM didn't go ahead. Now, had the meeting have gone ahead, and if no irregularities were raised or identified during the course of that meeting, and I'm guessing this is why you said it wouldn't have necessarily all been null and void, but this is a question that often comes up. So although this is not strictly enshrined in a constitution in these sorts of terms, I think it's important just to take this opportunity to let you all know, because this happens. We have meetings, we think that we've done the right thing, we've made decisions in an appropriate way, we think that everyone who voted was allowed to vote, but then later on it comes to light, oh goodness, that constitution that we were operating under actually isn't registered as our constitution, or wasn't at the time. And if those irregularities were not picked up at the time of the meeting, then ordinarily those decisions made at the meeting stand. Because otherwise we'd be, rehashing a lot of matters decided upon at
In that example, people who are good at maths will realise that if the 2022 Constitution wasn't in play and it was the 2025 AGM, there's been 3 other AGMs that have happened since that Constitution was adopted and not
Very good
registered.
point.
So three AGMs, 3 elections already occurred.
Yep.
And as you said, not picked up, but a good point that it was picked up prior to the AGM. So even if we had gone ahead with it, it's likely that member would have questioned it at the meeting and invalidated the whole thing anyway.
Yep.
Over to you for confession number 2, Steve.
Fascinating stuff. Look, see, this is why we're governance nerds and why we have so much fun. They say if you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life, or something along those lines. So this confession comes in from a golf club. Now, this is a pretty common challenge in golf clubs, but it's not unique to golf. Across the not-for-profit landscape, we've got a legal entity. So the not-for-profit organisation, as Matt's touched on, it might be an incorporated association, it might be a company limited by guarantee, it might be an Indigenous corporation. Whatever your legal structure, if you're a legal entity in your own right, then you may have, over the course of your organisation's history, created subcommittees or operating committees within your structure. And those subcommittees may be responsible for operational tasks. So that might be things like sponsorship and marketing. It might be facility maintenance. It might be, finance. That's right. So
Conduct, discipline.
These are all the sorts of committees, as you could probably guess from Matt's comments, that we suggest organisations consider. But there might also be a cohort of your membership which, to some extent, kind of do their own thing. Now, in this golf club, they have very clear sort of separation in the minds of many of their members amongst these cohorts. And that might be veteran golfers, so, golfers over a certain age. It might be female golfers, and it might be junior golfers, as an example. Now, this club was really keen to tighten up their controls because in their operating environment, in effect, their constitution was exposing them. And what we mean by that is that the autonomy that was afforded to that group of committees in charge of running golf for veterans or golf for women or golf for juniors was really, in each of their case, able to operate without any board oversight. So the board didn't know what was going on in each of those operational areas of the club's membership. The board had no oversight of their money. So each of these groups, these membership section subcommittees, we'll call them, even though they hadn't codified them clearly in their constitution, we now have codified them very clearly in their new constitution that we worked with the club to rewrite. And they can manage their own money and they could coordinate their own activities and so on. So when the board identified that this was an exposure and that this was a risk to the club, they got us involved not only to rewrite the constitution, but also to support them in messaging the change that was necessary with their membership section subcommittees. So we set about talking with the club and talking with these subcommittees about the risks that exist if this arrangement was able to carry on unchecked. And some of those critical risks that we've often pointed to are things like insurance. So let's say that there's something that goes wrong during an activity organised by one of these membership section subcommittees. So during a veterans competition, for instance. If something goes wrong in that setting and the club's insurance is called upon, the club makes a claim against its insurance. Let's say there's damage to property or injury to someone involved in the activity being delivered by that membership section subcommittee. There is a risk, in our opinion, that the insurance company is going to come in and do an assessment and they're going to say, oh, okay, so you're telling us that what's happening here under this coordination of this membership section is club activities. Okay, and you're claiming on the club's insurance, so that makes sense. However, this committee is doing all of this stuff without any oversight from the board. And this committee is managing their own money. And that money, here's where it starts to get really important, is not accounted for on your annual financial statements as an incorporated association. So therein lies an opportunity for an insurance company, for instance, to deny a claim or, for some quite significantly detrimental outcome to fall upon the club or the members who made it necessary for that insurance claim to be lodged in the first instance. Someone might have been seriously injured. Now, and the pushback that we got from some members is, oh, that'll never happen. That's never happened in our 67-year club history. It's never going to happen. Past experience is not a reasonable indicator of future outcomes. Just listen to the PDS when you hear a superannuation ad. But the reality is that you can't bury your head in the sand and say that will never happen. So in the process of us workshopping the reasons that these membership section subcommittees really need to be tightened up, we identified a really critical element, which is GST liability. So this club is GST registered. However, the money that is being collected or was being collected by each of those individual membership section subcommittees did not include a GST amount. So GST was not being charged of individuals who were paying money to the club by making a payment to this membership section subcommittee. So that means foreseeably that this club could be deemed to be committing tax fraud because they have not been remitting GST for the last 26 years since they've been registered for GST as a legal entity to the ATO on all of that money that membership section subcommittee has been collecting. So that is a massive exposure. And to the argument that, that'll never happen, that we never need to make an insurance claim and therefore the insurance, it not paying out won't be a problem for us. The ATO is probably the greatest debt collection agency in our country. And if you have unpaid tax and there's a risk that you're running of being found guilty of committing tax fraud, the likelihood of you getting caught is pretty good. So I would suggest that this is a significant exposure for many organisations that have got these separate subcommittees that particularly if they're responsible for delivering services and activities for a contingent of an organisation's membership. But if they're acting with complete autonomy and no oversight from the board, that there are some significant risks there. So I think that tightening up their constitution and us rewriting a document which provided for those membership section subcommittees to keep doing essentially what they were doing. They wanted to keep running their own activities, fine. All you have to do is report back to the board. Why? Because it's the board who are accountable. They are the people who are listed as our accountable authority by being registered with the Office of Fair Trading in Queensland, Consumer and Business Services in South Australia, ASIC if you're a company. So these are the people who are accountable for our financial and other decisions. Therefore, they've got to have oversight. They've got to know what's going on in the activities of the organisation. And critically, that money must be accounted for as club money, because it is. If it's not, and we don't account for it as club money, then we can't really lean on the legal protection that the organisation's legal status brings. So the constitution that we wrote for that club and that we've written for many other organisations with this separation and delegation of authority very clearly sets out the responsibilities and the authorities that are delegated to those committees, but maintains at all times that the board has to have the ability to pull that handbrake on because, for instance, if a membership section subcommittee is doing things and spending money in a way that places the solvency of the entire club or organisation at risk, the board must have the ability to check that and to call it into, bring it under control. And at all times, the accountability rests with the board or management committee. We can delegate responsibility as a board or management committee, but we can't delegate accountability. So massive lesson learned there for that club. And now everything's harmonious and the people who want to keep delivering veterans or women's or junior golf can just do that and focus on that, but the board have got some oversight.
Crucial there is board oversight. So as Steve said, it's not suggesting that these groups can't continue operating and having raffles and having Tuesday morning social sessions or whatever it might be. It just needs to be with the oversight of the board, so the board that can understand what's happening. A counter, not a confession, celebration, I guess, is another club that we worked with who had not those issues, but they identified those issues from that membership section group. And when we engaged with the club to do a constitution review and we talked about a lot of this, that group who was part of, because don't forget too, these membership sections, they're still members of the club. So although they might have their cohort over here running different events, they are still ultimately members of that club. So the members who participated in the constitution review and the member forums that we held understood the importance of what we were talking about. So they then, as a separate membership section, contacted us separately and said, well, we'd like to rewrite our constitution so that we can align with the club's new constitution and make sure that the oversight that you talked about is taken care of. Now, I put constitution like that because they did call it the constitution, but the club already had a constitution. So through that project, we actually rewrote them a document that we relabeled as operating procedures, which allowed that subgroup to continue having things like meetings. They still had a president and a treasurer and a secretary of that subgroup, but it aligned with the club's constitution. So when they talked about finances, the finances needed to be audited by the club's auditor. And the subcommittee and the working groups or whatever involved in that group at all time needed to be approved by the board. So the board always had that oversight. It's very rare that it happens that way, where they proactively come to us and say, yeah, we'd like to get on board and we'd like to jump on the bus with you.
Yeah.
Usually there is a little bit of push and shove.
Yep.
So that was a really good celebration as opposed to a confession that I thought I'd share. Okay, so confession number 3. This one is, and even when you were talking about the last one, Steve, I thought we were both thinking of the same club, but you could insert 100 other clubs in that exact scenario and it's going to still apply. Same with this one, but this is one of the most recent ones. So we were engaged by this club, as an association, so a local sporting association, to run their AGM. And because I knew that it was important to understand what constitution they had, I asked them when was the constitution last registered with the OFT. It was a Queensland-based club, and they couldn't tell me. They had a 2017 version, but they weren't quite sure. And that was the one that they'd been operating on, I assume, for the last 9 years, or 8 years because it was last year, but they weren't quite sure. So I said, okay, before we do anything, how about you get in touch with the OFT and ask them to tell you when was the last constitution registered with them. It wasn't 2017, it was 1988. So their constitution that they were actually supposed to be running under was almost 30 years old. And given that they thought the 2017 one was the one at play, for at least 8 years they'd been running under the wrong one. And who knows what was happening between 1988 and 2017. I'm sure there was a whole heap of versions in there somewhere that were either written and they just started using them. Maybe they adopted them but never registered them. But the fact that the OFT had the most recent version as 1988 means that that was the last time that association lodged their constitution with the OFT. And so therefore that is the one that they needed to be using. Now the problem, among many, with a 1988 constitution is that it's very unlikely to be modern. It's very unlikely to be compliant with the current legislation because the legislation has changed many times. So the first issue there is that because the legislation has been amended and updated so many times since 1988, a lot of what's written in that constitution will be superseded or overruled by the legislation itself. So it might say this in clause 15, but the act or the legislation actually overrules it. So it's not worth the paper that it's written in, because although the constitution says it, if the act or the legislation says otherwise, then what we say is the act prevails. So the act overrules that. So that creates a difficulty because a lot of the information in that constitution was outdated and essentially redundant because it had been overruled.
And that applies regardless of your legal structure. So if you're an incorporated association in any state or territory of Australia, if you're company limited by guarantee, if you're an Indigenous corporation, if you're a body corporate, if you're a legal entity and your constitution rules governing document, and there are some other terms like an Indigenous corporation will have a rule book, for instance, to relate back to the comments you were making about rules earlier. Regardless of your legal structure though, if the legislation under which you're established as a legal entity differs in any way from what your constitution says, the act always prevails, the legislation always wins. And this is one of the main reasons why, particularly for those online who said that they haven't reviewed their constitution in at least 10 years, then it's very likely that there have been changes to your legislation and that your constitution is not in alignment with that. Now, you might argue, well, that doesn't really matter because, the Constitution's just there as a bit of a guide. I won't go into detail opening that can of worms, but the reality is that the Constitution itself, if it does not align with the Act, means that people have to use two documents to interpret your current compliance requirements. And firstly, as I said earlier, not everyone loves reading constitutions. Even less people love reading legislation. So the likelihood that even your administrators, your leaders, the decision makers on your committee are going to go and interpret, refer to and reference the Act as well as your constitution is pretty slim. Therein lies a really good opportunity to say, well, look, we've got an old document. Let's create a new document that can be the one point of truth to which we go, where we refer when we're preparing for our AGM in the context of this confession, or making any other decision as a board or membership group for that matter.
And can it also be things that your constitution is silent on, but the Act now provides for? So a lot of legislation, or most legislation, will now provide for electronic voting. COVID was a good test of that. So a lot of older constitutions won't allow for that because online wasn't, well, in 1988, online definitely didn't mean what it does now.
What's the interweb?
Yeah. So it's not provided for, but the Act does. So that means that the Act says that you can do it, but your constitution's silent, so you might not know that. So with this confession number 3 around this local sporting organisation, going back to 1988, really old, really, it was one of those ones that it was actually on a typewriter. So I can always tell the age of a document if it's got a rusted staple image at the top left corner. You know that that's got a bit of age about it. And if it has been typed out on a typewriter and not a digital copy, you can bet that it's probably more than 20 years old.
It's the real Courier New font.
It is. Yeah. It is. So with the that old constitution, one of the biggest challenges they found was not just the age of it, which made it very difficult as well, but there was also contradictions in the constitution around what their membership types were. So to a point where one line said a member is someone who is a member of a affiliated team or club, and they are the only ones that have voting rights. The next line said all members have voting rights. So when we were working with that association to determine, well, at this AGM, who can actually vote? Is it every team nominates one person, or is it anyone that rolls up who is a member? Do they get to vote? And because they were contradictory clauses, we made the call to allow both, because you could argue that either one was in there, and although one contradicted the other, the fact that they were both written almost in stone and chiseled in, that's how old it was, but it was there in what do you call it, the Courier New. It was there, so we had to use that. So that made it a little bit difficult in the first instance to actually decide who would be eligible members. And then there was a whole other examples of that where there was contradictions, there were things that didn't make sense. Confession number 1 was another example of a constitution that said something here and then something slightly different over here, and then a few pages down something that was the complete opposite of what it said up here. Confession number 1 example as well also had some parts where it said that the board was the 8 directors. In other parts, it said it's the 8 directors and the 8 associate directors. So again, there was contradictions there. There was conflict within the document itself. So it's very difficult to then say, well, when we have a board election, who are we electing? And as Steve said, it's the board or the management committee that's accountable, no one else. So you need to be really clear as to who your board is. And is it 8? Is it 16? If I'm an associate director, am I actually deemed a board member? Do I get to vote at board meetings? Am I held accountable like the other 8 board members? So it's really important to make sure that you review your constitution regularly to look for things like that. And hopefully you pick it up before it causes a problem, but a lot of the time it's the problem that actually highlights why there's an issue with the constitution itself. So yeah, there was a few little differences there over board terms. So how long were board members elected for? Who was eligible to be on the board? Who was eligible to be a member itself? As I said, who could vote and who couldn't. So that was a real tough one. Happy to say that the club or the association has engaged us to do a constitution review and get it all sorted. So within the next few months, they'll have a brand new constitution that's modern, that's compliant, that takes out all those inconsistencies, and then we'll lodge it on the behalf of them with the regulatory body so that we make sure that that's done. So we're really looking forward to sorting that out, because 1988 was quite a long time ago.
Some time back, yes.
Over to you, Steve, for confession number 4.
Okay, number 4 is a nice sort of follow on from the discussion we were having a little earlier about, different groups within one legal entity. And just as a quick bit of background for those who live here in Australia and who may be involved in the sporting landscape, you will very likely be familiar with the fact that we're undergoing a bit of a transition in our sporting landscape. And this has been largely driven from the bottom up as well as the top down. So Sport Australia, the Australian Sports Commission, has been really driving a shift, not only for more professional and contemporary operating not-for-profit organisations across the sporting landscape, i.e. national sporting organisations that are not incorporated associations, but rather companies limited by guarantee and have therefore placed on them greater compliance requirements and reporting obligations to ASIC rather than their maybe current state regulator. This is also a shift that we're seeing across various sports where we've got a recognition that volunteerism is plummeting, and this is something that Matt talks a lot about in supporting clients of ours in building good volunteer strategies and engaging and keeping engaged more and more people within their service delivery. But just to throw a couple of very quick statistics at you, in 2016, 19% of Australians of working age provided regular voluntary assistance with an organisation or group. So not just volunteering out on the street, helping people out, but actually within the confines of an established organisation. Fast forward 5 years to 2021, and that number had dropped from 19% to 14%. So that's a massive reduction of a quarter, 26% reduction over only 5 years. Now, some people might say, yeah, but in 2021, we were experiencing COVID. We were more disconnected from our community organisations and our communities from, than ever before. However, and that's true. Yes, of course we were. I remember vividly, how disconnected we all were during 2020 and 2021. However, I can confidently say it ain't going back to 19%. And the reason it's not going back to 19%, or I'm so confident that that's the case, is that in the early to mid thousands, that number was more than a third. It was more like 36% of Australians of working age who provided regular voluntary assistance with an organisation or group. So we're on this sustained decline of volunteerism, and I suspect, I actually believe very strongly that that is going to continue. We might have some periods of plateau, but all in all, we are continuing to experience this decline. So partly because of that, and partly because of opportunities for greater efficiency and the fact that, the larger the organisation, typically the stronger it's going to be. And we've recently worked with one state sporting organisation on a comprehensive project which very clearly evidences that that is the case. The big groups get bigger and more successful. The small groups struggle. They struggle, if it's a sporting organisation, they struggle to field teams every week, and therefore from year to year they're struggling to fill committee positions and so on. So what we're experiencing is this transition whereby we're going from lots of small incorporated associations, for instance, to a smaller number of large not-for-profit entities. And this is confronting for a lot of people because they've, forever been involved in their club, and they, the discussion for those who are online will know that Adam from Kiwana Football Club is online here, and that's the club that I very passionately played for many years as a younger, fitter lad. And, people bleed yellow if you play for the Kiwana Bananas. People, have given literally blood, sweat and tears for their club, in some cases over decades. So they're going to be very emotionally invested and passionate about their organisation. So this struggle then with the concept of giving up that identity can be one that holds organisations back from making a very effective change that they can gain a lot of benefit from. So that's just a little bit of context, and what we're working on with a range of sporting organisations now, and this I understand as a sport-specific example, but this same notion applies broadly across the not-for-profit sector in terms of partnership coordination and consolidation of resources to achieve collectively more success over the long term. So we are working in a range of sports to bring existing clubs together. So it might be a handful of clubs in a local area, and they currently all need a committee. They currently all need to run an AGM. They currently all need to get their audited, financial statements ready in time for presentation to that AGM for lodgement with the Office of Fair Trading in Queensland or counterparts around the country and so on. And there are all these statutory requirements which add volunteer burden, and they all need a blue card, portal account, and they all need to manage blue cards separately. And there's all this duplication. All of that stuff is happening in every one of those separate clubs. So in the interest of addressing that duplication and streamlining the operations and service delivery of not-for-profit organisations, we're working with organisations to amalgamate and come together, and they can keep their identity. So they can still, by virtue of very clearly delegated authorities to separate committees, they can still be the yellow club and the red and black club, and they can still have all those colours, and they can be delegated the authority to make decisions about what jerseys they're going to wear and the facilities out of which they're going to potentially play and so on. But consolidation is a really effective means of allowing those people to just focus on running football, cricket, doing whatever activity they're really interested in within the parameters of their subcommittee structure. So this is a story about another regional sporting association. And there's currently fragmentation within that sport. So some of it happens under the auspices of the local association. Some of it happens under separate incorporated associations. So we've got an elite club that competes in a semi-professional capacity in a high-level competition. Then we've got administration of local competition that happens under the association. And then we've got umpires that sit out to the side as well. So what we're working with this organisation to do is to consolidate all of those separate legal entities and to bring them under one banner, whereby we're going to transition from being an incorporated association to become a company limited by guarantee, which will bring with it greater flexibility for the makeup of their board, for instance. And they are then going to have these operational subcommittees. Now, their delegated authority will be very clearly articulated not only in the Constitution, but also in terms of reference. So there's comfort and confidence there that the people who want to take care of the elite sport can do that and can do a really good job. The people who want to take care of the umpires in that sport or the referees in any other sport can just focus on doing that. But they don't need to have their own AGM. They don't need to do all of the statutory things that they currently need to do as a separate legal entity. So what we're doing is building a model and a constitution that aligns with that, as well as those other documents like terms of reference, bylaws, regulations, and so on. That means these organisations are going to become one, but they're going to have a significant amount of protection in place because, as I said earlier, the board will have oversight, and if things go really pear-shaped in any one of those operational areas, the board will be able to pull the handbrake on. It's unlikely that that's going to happen because they're currently operating successfully as separate legal entities, so bringing them together is far more likely, in our experience, indeed 100% of the time when successful individual organisations come together, they become even more successful as a consolidated entity. So there's going to be protection for the board as the accountable authority, the people who are listed with, the regulatory authority as the decision makers and accountable parties. But there's also going to be protection for each of those operational areas delivering their, keen area of interest, because they'll know exactly what their responsibilities are, because that'll be set out in the Constitution as well as in the terms of reference. So there's going to be really clear delegated authority, there's going to be really clear protection for the decision makers, but there's also going to be really clear protection for the constituents, the members of this organisation, the people who are participating in the activities delivered by the organisation. So therein lies our fourth and final confession, and we have talked a little bit about a few key themes, and we'll do a bit of a wrap up. And I might maybe hand over to you, Matt, to talk through some of our sort of best practice recommendations, and also then to leave you with a few key takeaways before we once again share with you the QR code that you can scan and head to a page on our website where you can upload a copy of your Constitution for us to have a look at it at no cost.
That's one of the questions. Do we offer a review? Yes, we do. So Steve will share that QR code soon, and you can upload your Constitution for us to review. So we'll do a complimentary review and highlight those things. And it's a really good point. You don't know what you don't know. We know what to look for, and that's where we can help out. So if you send that through, we can definitely review it for you and give you some feedback as to either what's missing, but also what you have in there that could be outdated or not compliant that you could change. And we also sometimes just suggest, look, that's okay and it's allowed and it's compliant, but have you ever thought of this instead to give you a little bit of a food for thought, so to speak?
And just quickly, I'm guessing that none of the people who are joining us online today stuck their hand up to rewrite their organisation's constitution. They probably stuck their hand up to be a volunteer, or even in the case of some of you who are staff members with not-for-profits across the country, you stuck your hand up to make a difference. You care about your community, you care about the organisation with which you're volunteering or working to deliver services to that community, and the need to keep your constitution and other compliance requirements up to date is just one of those things that rears its head during your time in office. So we do this every day. We are governance nerds. We love writing constitutions. People tell us that we've got to get a life, but we genuinely get a kick out of making a process which might otherwise be a little bit confronting and scary, a whole lot less painful.
Now, you just spoke about a situation that happens quite a bit where people do, they might not join to do it, but they volunteer to rewrite the constitution for the club. Say, oh, look, I'll do it. Just recently, I spoke to someone who said, yeah, we had a gentleman on our board who said that he'd take care of it. Don't outsource it. We'll get it done. 2 years later, and nothing's been done. So they've still got an outdated constitution, and that volunteer probably has a full-time job and a whole other life, along with all the other volunteer roles that he would be filling. So he hasn't got around to it because he simply doesn't have time. It's not something that you can do quickly if you want to do it properly. So to do a constitution review in the first instance, going through it as a group, as a board or a committee, absolutely. You can go through, highlight some things, write question marks. What does this mean? How would this apply? But to actually properly review and update your constitution, it's not something you can do overnight, quite literally, because a lot of legislation, depending on where you are, will actually require certain time periods as well. So you might write the constitution tonight, but in order for your members to adopt it, you'll need to give a notice period. So it could be 14 or 21 days before you even have the general meeting to then adopt the constitution. We would always advise on having a review period as well to give that document to your members first before you even call the general meeting. And then there's the lag time between lodging it with the regulatory body and that body coming back saying, yes, it's been registered. So there's a few instances where you get instant, once it's adopted, it's in play, but it still needs to be registered. Whereas other states will require you to lodge it first, and only when they confirm it does it take effect. So just some things to look for. So if you were looking at your own constitution as a board or a committee or a working group, some things to be aware of, a few red flags. One of them, and very, very commonly, is that the members are the ones that set your fees every year. So whether that's membership, subscription, whatever you might call it at your club or organisation, it is an outdated provision, and under most legislation, if not all, you don't have to have it set by the members. It can be set by the board or the committee. So we highly recommend making sure that the board or the management committee are the ones that set the fees. Going back to Steve's point, it is the board management committee who is accountable. They are in charge of making sure the club remains solvent and can pay the bills and has money in the bank. Asking the members to set those fees, it's very unlikely that the members will say, yeah, I'm happy to put the fees up for the betterment of the club. It'd be great if they did. But as I always say, Coles and Woolworths don't ask me how much I'd like to pay for milk, because if they did, it wouldn't be $5 a litre. It would probably be back in the good old days and maybe 50 cents if I'm feeling charitable. So that's the first one, is making sure that you do have that provision to allow the board or the management committee to set the fees, because you know the finances of your organisation and you can have a better judgment as to how those fees go up each year. The next one is around your membership. So although your constitution might not specifically state what type of members you have, it should allow for clear delineation between, for example, adult members who are voting members who come along to a general meeting and can vote and can be elected to your board or management committee. Then you might have your junior members who are under 18 and therefore cannot vote or be on the board. A lot of clubs and associations have life members who have been given the honour of life membership by the members at a general meeting. So usually they are allowed to vote and be elected to the board or committee. But then you might have a fourth type, so a limited or social or restricted honorary, are types of membership that don't allow for voting rights and they aren't eligible to be on your board or committee. The reason that that's really important is because we come across a lot of constitutions that are very vague in that space, and it's not really clear which of these members are going to be our parents, for example. So if Steve and Steve's wife and Steve's dad and his wife's mum and grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle, if they all want to join because Steve's daughter plays that sport, how does that work? Does Steve's daughter get one free adult for every junior that is signed up? Is it a different type of membership model? So it's really important to have that clear. The second example that we see a lot is a whole lot of membership types in the Constitution that haven't been used since 1988. So we'll come across constitutions that have got 10 different membership types, but half of them aren't even valid anymore. They're not even active, they're not even used. But they're still in the Constitution, so technically there's still types of membership offered by your organisation. So just making sure that your membership categories and their voting rights and eligibility for the board are current and they actually reflect what's happening at your organisation. And then the last one, just around discipline and appeal. So we haven't really talked about it today because when Steve and I got together for this webinar, we could have spoken about thousands of examples of constitutions letting people down and letting organisations down. But what we didn't talk about, purely because we had so many ideas, we could only fit a few in, is just around discipline and appeals. So ideally, your constitution has a very clear discipline process to follow should the board or management committee need to terminate or suspend someone's membership. Again, a lot of clubs get in trouble because their constitution's not clear. It's a little bit wishy-washy and it's quite vague and we don't really know how to follow it, so they end up making it up themselves. When CPRG writes constitutions, we make sure that the discipline procedure is crystal clear, step by step, in black and white, so it's almost impossible to be misinterpreted. So that if the board or the management committee is thinking about suspending someone or something so severe that they need to kick them out of their club, although that doesn't take away the awkward conversations and you might still need to have that difficult one-on-one with or not the one-on-one, but a meeting with that member, at least you don't have to try and work out what the process is. So the process is really clear, step by step. We do this, then we do this, then we do this. That then leads to the appeal. So if you have an appeal right in your constitution, so giving that person natural justice to say, well, hang on, I was just kicked out of my club and I didn't even know what was going on, and next minute I've been kicked out. So I'm going to appeal that decision. Having that appeal process also really clear in your constitution is just as important. So again, it protects the members, the organisations itself, and the board and management committee, so you know what to do when this happens. If someone appeals our decision, we need to do this step, then this step, then this step. So those are just some things. There's plenty more, but those are the few that I picked out that are really important. So when having a look yourselves, and we'll definitely look for them if you send it through for the complimentary assessment, but have a look and see if something went pear-shaped, or if we had an AGM today, do we actually know who shows up and who gets to vote? Do we actually know what we need to do if we're suspending or terminating a membership? Do we know who our members are? And if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then it's definitely time for a review.
And that's so important because we see clubs, fighting out battles in the Supreme Court because there's been a member who's had their membership terminated, that person's appealed the process and they haven't been afforded natural justice. And these situations can grow very rapidly from molehills into mountains. And clarity in your constitution helps to keep the committee, the decision makers, on track and on the straight and narrow in terms of doing exactly the right thing.
And even little things like outdated constitutions, we were talking about it before, around some old constitutions say that the notice of a general meeting needs to be placed in a conspicuous place in the clubhouse. So technically anything but that is breaching your constitution, but that's not practical. And these days it's much easier to actually advise your members of general meetings through social media or members' mail outs. So that's another reason to constantly update and modernise your constitution so you're not falling into that trap.
So just quickly, I'll jump in. I can see, Jennifer, you've got your hand up. If you want to pop a note in the chat. I am conscious of time and we will definitely wrap up by 1 o'clock. So Jennifer, if you want to let us know, if you'd like to carry on a discussion after the session, let us know in the chat and we'll be able to get in touch with you because we've got your details from your registration. If there is something that you want to add in to the mix, Jennifer, feel free to pop that in the chat as well, if there's a share. And thanks, Adam, who's popped a note in there that their volunteers at Kiwana Football Club are down by 37% since 23 and parent player expectations are up by 12%. So there's a bit of a disconnect there in terms of those shifts, and I think that would be representative largely of a lot of organisations across the country. So thanks for sharing those insights, Adam. And for me, that's a great indication of an organisation that understands, its operating environment very deeply.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the key takeaways, the first one is to, first of all, understand what constitution is at play. So if you don't know, then find out, and it's either getting in touch with your regulatory body or maybe doing a little bit of digging within the files of your organisation to find is there a letter or an email or AGM minutes that at least give me an idea of when this constitution was adopted and registered. The second one, if you are going to update your constitution, so if you're going to change it, don't retrofit it. Don't do a patchwork job, because you are almost guaranteed you will miss something and create those inconsistencies that we've talked about. So if you just change one clause, it's the butterfly effect. The butterfly flaps its wings and an earthquake happens on the other side of the world. We changed this clause, but we didn't consider what that means to this clause down here and this clause up here. So making sure that you actually do it properly from start to finish is really important. Otherwise, you will fall into the trap of changing something that then creates another issue somewhere else in your constitution. So retrofitting and patchwork does not work. And finally, Steve's going to put the QR code back up for you. So if you would like a complimentary assessment of your organisation's constitution, you can scan that QR code. You can also go to the, is it the URL?
The URL.
CPRgroup.com.au.
I don't know what URL stands for. I could very quickly find out by asking an AI.
Unreal language.
There we go.
So scan that, and that goes straight through to us. So either myself or Steve or some of our colleagues will go through that. We look for those key things that we've talked about today. So we're looking at your membership, we're looking at your board structure, we're looking at other things that we've spoken about. And then we just give you a very clear feedback as to, this is probably in need of a change, this is okay, but have you considered this? Or this isn't even in there. So when we talk about the legislative changes, when the legislation changes, you need to make sure that those things are captured in your constitution as well.
Yeah, indeed. And we love every opportunity we get to look at constitutions. I can see that there's a bit of interest in the chat, so certainly feel free to head over to that link or scan the QR code and upload your constitution. Thank you very much for the opportunity to engage with you all today. It's great to have a good number of you online as familiar faces or names, and to see a few newbies on there as well. We hope that you've enjoyed this sort of different format of our approach today in taking the confessions approach, whereby we've not just had a screen shared the whole time. So again, if you want to give us any feedback, feel free to do so. And as always, I'm going to head to the next slide here. If you would like to keep our marketing manager happy and head over to Google and give us a 5-star review, please feel free to do so. Yes, we've got egos and we love to hear nice things about ourselves, but more important than that is that if you share our details and your experience on Google, then you're connecting us with other people who we might be able to help in the way that we've helped you as well. Similarly, if you're a podcasty type person, head over to Basket Case Clubs. This session will be turned into a podcast episode. And you can also listen at Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And it's Matt, it's me, it's Michael, it's others from our team, as well as interviewees talking about things that make organisations basket cases, but also sharing great ideas of those organisations that have become showcases as well. So
thanks for your thanks for your thank yous. And there's a question in there, how long is that offer open? For quite some time. It's been open for a while around the complimentary assessments. Absolutely. And we're going to continue doing that.
We'll keep it rolling.
For absolutely the foreseeable future.
Yep.
So yeah, throw it up there. And if you have trouble with the QR code or anything like that, just cprgroup.com.au and get in touch and we'll help you out.
And we're real people. Yep, you can even schedule a call from that previous QR code or even just heading to our webpage, cprgroup.com.au, as Matt said. Contact us and you can schedule a time to have a chat with one of our team, or shoot us an email and we'll actually get back to you, we promise.
And although we love meeting people in person, we can do constitution reviews entirely online as well. So if you are in New Zealand or you're in somewhere in Australia that's not close to us geographically, we can definitely help you out. You don't need to be in the same town or postcode as us. We can do constitution reviews with the interweb using URLs.
That's it. Look at us go, living in the future. Very
Thanks,
good.
everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.